Hi everyone. Today we are going to discuss how Kafka is able to insert messages into the disk with high speed, how it is able to insert millions of messages per second into the disk. So, before watching this video, I highly recommend you to watch my previous video where I explained why Kafka is so fast. In that video, I explained when a producer try to send a message to the Kafka cluster, it will be inserted into the OS page cache and right away it will send the response to the producer. It won't insert into the disk right away. The disk insertion will be done asynchronously using fsync function. So this is how we achieved high performance in the Kafka cluster. So, but the problem is, even though you don't insert the message into the disk at that time, at some point you have to insert that into the disk, right? Otherwise, you will lose. There may be a chance you will lose the message. So one thing is the your PC, the server might be restarted, or there can be a power cut, or there can be a hardware failure. So the RAM, all the data in the RAM in the cache may be lost. So at some point you have to store the message into a persistent storage like disk, correct? And there is one more problem to it. Normally caches are of a very less size. For example, let's take a RAM of 64 GB. In that, it allocated 4 GB for OS, probably 10 GB for some JVM heap. Remaining 50 GB, it can use it for OS page cache where it can store the Kafka messages. But you will be getting lots of messages into Kafka, and there will be at some point there will be hundreds of GBs of data which will be stored. So you cannot hold that much data into the cache, right? So at some point you have to clean up the old messages in the cache, and you have to make sure all those messages are inserted into the disk. So if the messages are inserting with high speed with millions of messages per second into the cache, but they are inserting very slow into the disk, if there is that lag, at some point into the disk they copy very slowly, but in the RAM they're coming very fast. The RAM will be full, and then the old messages will be gone without inserting into the disk. So there is a risk of that. So to avoid that, you have to insert into the disk with the same speed, something like millions of messages per second you have to insert into the disk, right? So to understand this, let's understand that for one message how much time it takes to insert into the disk, what all parts are involved in this whole flow. So for example, if you take a message which is of size 1 kilobyte, and while inserting any message into the disk, there are generally three parts. One is it has to find a free space. This is called free page space inside the disk. So inside any hard disk like or HDD or STD, it has to find the free page for it to insert the data. So this is called a random disk seek. So it has to randomly check in the SSD drive to find some free page so that it can insert that message. So it will take some time, right? So for example, approximately it will take 0.1 millisecond. And the second one is, okay, now it find the space. It want to try to insert the message. So, but before inserting message, there will be some overhead activities also during this whole thing. The OS will try to do if interrupt handling while there are any existing messages during context switching. So there will be some overhead activities that are part of this process. So something like command setup, queue dispatch, FTL lookup, and then OS interrupt handling and completion. So these are all some overhead activities. You need not to remember these things. This is just for your information. So this is also will take some time. So for example, it will take again 0.2 milliseconds for these activities. And finally, inserting the messages, writing it into disk. So in the free space that we have found before, we will just write it. This is very fast because we know where to insert. Just it is writing. It will take probably zero 0.5 microseconds. So in total, for one message it will take 0.1 milliseconds plus 0.2 milliseconds plus 0.5 microseconds. So microseconds is negligible in front of this milliseconds, right? So I'll ignore that. So in total, in 0.3 millisecond, you can write one message into the disk. So that means in 1 millisecond, you can write 3 messages into the disk. So if you take 1 second, which is nothing but 1000 milliseconds, 1000 into 3, which is 10,000 messages per second. So with this approach, you can write 10,000 messages from OS page cache area in the RAM to the disk. Do you think this is good enough? Not at all, right? We need to insert kind of millions of messages per second into the disk. 10,000 is nothing. So how Kafka handled this? So let me explain how Kafka handled this situation. So let's say in the disk there are multiple segments. So we can call this as log segments. So here the data will be, so for each you can think of it like every log segment is of size 1 GB, and this is configurable thing. You can keep 1 GB, 2 GB based on the configuration, it will work. So all it, how Kafka handles it is, Kafka will assign one complete log segment to one topic partition of Kafka. That means all the messages related to that partition will be inserted in the same log segment sequentially. So let's say first it will insert here, the next will be appended here, append here, appended here. Once this whole 1 GB is completed, then it will find some other log segment and then insert there. Again also within that segment it will do sequentially till it completes, it won't go to the other segment. So this is called sequential disk writes. So this file is called commit log, and you can also call this as append only log. So this is how Kafka manages to insert messages into the into the disk. So now instead of one message, what Kafka does is it will club multiple messages. For example, 1000 messages into one batch. So if one message is of 1 KB, 1 kilobyte, 1000 message means 1 MB. That is also not a problem. So you can transfer one message, 1 MB of data easily to the disk. So now how much time it takes? So as we discussed, there are three parts. No, one is disk seek. So to find this log segment, so the free space for this one, it took the same time like this. So zero point 0.1 millisecond, 0.1 millisecond. But from the second message till the 1000 message, do you think again we have to do 1000 times 0.1 millisecond? No. Why? Because we are not doing the random seek from the second message, right? Only for one message we'll find that. Once it is inserted into this log segment, from then on, for all the messages, we are just appending to the same log sequentially. So that means we already know the address where we need to insert. So it won't take much time there. You have to just see the current location and append to that one. So it will, you can find this location in less than a microsecond. So that is negligible in front of this one. So even for 1000 messages, approximately the seek time or the free space seek time or the log segment seek time is the same. Now coming to the second part, which is the overhead time. So even for one message block or 1 MB data or 1 KB data, overhead time is also the same, which is 0.2 milliseconds. Now coming to the writing of messages. So into the file, you have to write messages one after the other for 1000. So if for one message it takes zero point 0.5 microseconds, for 1000 messages, obviously we need to, it will take 1000 into zero point 0.5 microseconds, which is 0.5 milliseconds. So now this is not no more negligible in front of this. So in total, the sum is 0 0.8 milliseconds. So approximately 1 millisecond. So which means using this sequential logging disk writing technique, you are able to insert 1,000 messages in approximately 1 millisecond time. So that means in 1 second, which is nothing but 1,000 milliseconds, you can process 1,000 into 1,000, which is nothing but 1 million messages per second. So this is what we wanted, right? Just by following this technique called sequential disk writing, append only log, you are able to insert millions of messages per second into the disk. So what Kafka does is, instead of sending or fsync or flushing one messages every time into the disk, it will take multiple messages, club them and push it into the disk. So the second benefit of this is, if you have to send 1 million messages one after the other, so you are making 1 million times you are writing into the disk, right? So the CPU also will be overloaded because of this 1 million requests. Now you are making only 10,000 requests. In every request you are passing 1,000 messages clubbed in one batch. So it is just 1,000 calls, 1,000 requests to the disk. So the CPU performance also will improve in this case. So this is how Kafka is able to achieve insertion of 1 million messages per second into the disk asynchronously. So now using Kafka is able to achieve speed plus durability. Durability means data is safe inside the disk. Safe inside disk. Both it is able to achieve. How it is able to achieve speed? Just it is writing inside the OS page cache area inside the RAM and then sending the response to the producer. So producer is inserting only till the RAM, then is getting the response. Even the consumer also when he wants to, generally consumers read the latest messages, right? All the latest messages will always be present in the OS page cache, so they can be served from there only. So getting data from RAM is so fast again. So consumers also will quickly get the data. They need not to go to the disk, because normally any consumer continuously read the latest messages, their offset will be the recent offset, right? Only in rare cases, like a new application has came up and it want to read the messages from day one, so then those things will not be present in the cache. They have to go to the disk, and from disk it has to copy to the cache, and from cache you have to get the messages from there. But those are very very rare. So most of the cases we always request for the new messages by the consumer, so it is also always so fast. So that means at the consumer side, what we are doing is called zero copy reads, which means there is no copy from disk to RAM for getting the messages. So even the producer and consumer are referring to the RAM only for inserting and reading the messages. So it is so fast. At the same time, we are making sure that our data is not lost by inserting the messages into the disk as soon as we can, so that if at all the cache is overloaded and it is cleaned up also, we have those messages inside the disk. So I hope you understood this very clearly. So we'll see you in the next video. Thank you.